Dick and Perry are in jail awaiting trial. Dick is incarcerated in the county jail, but to keep the two separate, Perry is placed in a cell usually reserved for women at the home of Deputy Sheriff Wendell Mayer and his wife. Perry befriends the couple, who treat him well, and he earns the trust and affection of a wild squirrel who lives right outside the window. When Perry is asked to sign his statement, he asks to be charged to reflect what he now claims to be the truth, that he killed the whole family and that Dick didn't kill Mrs. Clutter or Nancy. Perry does this to comfort Dick's mother. He also keeps a diary and remarks on his upcoming trial and current life with Mayers. Dick lives among the general population in county jails. He becomes popular with inmates and begins planning an escape. He meets a chief, but he is discovered before he can adopt his plan. Perry also begins to think about escaping, and he writes a note to two young boys who have looked at his cell and requested a hack file. After writing the note, Perry never sees the boys again, and he begins to wonder if they ever existed. Perry also contemplates suicide by using the light bulb in the cell to cut his wrists. In a dream where he succeeds in committing suicide, he is again visited by the yellow beard. The lawsuit arrives and the health of Perry and Dick is in question. The first doctors to examine Perry conclude that he is now, and was at the time of the murder, sane by legal definition. Further details on the behavior of the two men after the murder are provided. Perry says the two men couldn't stop laughing at the murders, that they felt great and joked about burying evidence and clean up. This new physical evidence was found by investigators and brought to justice along with the radio, binoculars and photographs of shoe scripts matching those of Dick and Perry. Each man is appointed a lawyer. Both attorneys admit the case isn't the most appealing for a defense attorney, but they do their best to represent Dick and Perry. Perry begins to correspond with Don Sullivan, a man with whom he served in the military. Don finally arrives to visit Perry in prison, and the two share a meal. Perry tells Don he's really not sorry and doesn't regret his crime. Don, a Christian, tells Perry that he is concerned for Perry's soul. Don admits that he appreciates Perry's company and friendship and personally concludes that if it was only by the grace of God that he himself didn't become a criminal in the same way as Perry. The property and assets of the Clutter family are auctioned. The turnout is high and everything is sold. The latest tragedy is the sale of Babe, Nancy's horse, who was not a useful pet, but a pet. Sue Kidwell is overwhelmed by the sight of Babe being led away by a farmer who intends to use the horse for plowing. Floyd Wells testifies as a mysterious witness. Prosecutors also present photos of the crime scene, physical evidence and Perry's confession. The defense is only able to present character witness and offer concluding arguments, more against the death penalty than for the innocence of the murderers. But Dick and Perry are both convicted and sentenced to death. The two arrive on death row, where they will stay for a total of 5 years. Meanwhile, Dick and Perry live with other prisoners on death row. The detainees are all within speaking distance of each other, but their cells line up so as not to see each other. Perry tries to starve, though this motivation may have been to be declared legally insane. The other residents on death row are very intelligent young men who killed the whole family and 3 young soldiers, George Ronald York and James Douglas, having participated in a multitasking assassination program due to their belief that the world has become hateful. The title of the chapter is revealed: On Death Row. The term used for those who have gone to the gallows and been executed is gone to the corner. Dick finds an attorney to appeal his conviction based on what he considers his lack of a fair trial. He is ultimately unsuccessful. Andrews is put to death on November 30, 1962. Dick and Perry are put to death on April 14, 1965. Old Dewey attends the execution and feels deep, true empathy for Perry in his last minute. The final scene of the book jumps ahead and finds Susan Kidwell and Old Dewey meeting one another in a graveyard. Susan is attending college and living in New York, just as she and Nancy had planned. The book ends optimistically, looking ahead to the future and with the feeling that Susan and O are moving on with life.
In this chapter, we can see in more detail how complicated Dick and Perry are. We see that in spite of being a criminal and a killer, Perry still manages to inspire sympathy in those around him, for example, with Don and Mrs. Meyer. Also, he's sensitive to Dick's mother and doesn't want her to suffer. But the dream about the two young men in the square that would help him escape and the dream about a bird and his suicidal fantasies indicate that he is descending into mental illness. Talking about Dick, given his normal family and normal life, it seems like there's no natural cause for his criminal behavior and murderous tendencies, unlike Perry, who had a traumatic childhood. As the doctors explained that Dick clearly has a psychological disorder, he seems to have convinced himself that he's not guilty, similar to the way he's convinced himself his whole life that he's anormal. He also says that he's okay with capital punishment as long as he's not the one they're going to hang. He even makes a joke about his punishment with Perry, and on the day of the hanging, he also makes a joke about the situation, making it seem that he really didn't think of the situation as something serious.
Much of the story has a third-person narrator or an omniscient narrator that knows and sees all that's happening in the story, and he has access to all the thoughts and feelings of all the characters, and this allows him to create impressive descriptive moments that give the reader a very clear and a whole perspective of the story. However, even though Capote uses omniscient narrator for most parts of the story, he also uses first-person narrator for the more emotional scenes. So the most fascinating scenes, like the story of the murder, or the story of Susan and Nancy Ewald when they first found the body of Nancy, or even the story of the execution of Perry and Dick that happens in this chapter in the corner, are scenes told in the first-person narrator or by a central narrator.
Beginning with the setting of the last chapter, we can see that this setting has a great influence on what happens in the chapter, because since it shows us the last days of Dick and Perry in jail, it gives us a dense and sad atmosphere which influences a lot the way in which Perry and Dick behave in their last days in prison. This makes the reading a little bit heavy because it's very descriptive. Also, another very descriptive scene in this chapter is the capital punishment and the sentence of Perry and Dick. In this murder scene is very strong due to the amount of detail that Truman Capote uses in this setting, in the description of this setting. Beginning with the symbols, after we can see two clear symbols. The first one is the capital punishment, because it symbolizes a growing tendency in American brutality, both in those who perpetrate violence and those who punish it. This is because in the early 1960s, the state of Kansas, the death penalty was the only sentence given for murder. So as Kansas state laws allows for parole to be given after only 15 years served of a life sentence, they were able to sentence a death penalty.
The author thoughts on the capital punishment are very clear, because across all of the chapter we can see how he vividly describes the gruesome deaths by hanging of Perry and Dick. And although some prison guards state that victims don't feel anything after their neck snaps, other witnesses of the death penalty say that heard gasp for air and see signs of struggle in the victims, stating that they were suffering and that they had a gruesome death. So we can see how Truman Capote in the book title reflects both how the Clotter's family were carried out of the concept of capital punishment and sanctioned murder. And as Capote says in the last chapter, 4 shotguns blast, all told, ended 6 human lives, because those killings of the Clotter family ended up ending the life of Perry and Smith. The second symbol that we can see in this last chapter is the yellow bird, because Perry Smith dreams of a yellow bird and whenever he faces dire or desperate situations. And this bird appeared to him first when he was a child, suffering of terrible abuse in the orphanage. And this yellow bird not only protects Perry in those types of situations, desperate situations, but also represents vengeance on the people who hurt him and who were bad with him.